our House Investigative Committee to investigate compliance with audit numbers 19-12 and 21-01. Today is October 28, 2021. It is shortly after 9:00 a.m. when this meeting has been noticed for both in-person or video conference. Present with us today is testifier Mr. Randall K.O. Lee, and he will be providing testimony on omissions in audit process findings or recommendations of any detections of non-compliance with laws, regulations, contracts, or grant agreements that were potentially significant in the context of work contracted for by the Office of the Auditor. Members, before we jump into this, I wanted to just start off with some comments and then also to give you a little bit of update on the discovery situation. So first on discovery, members, I have provided to members here in the room 2 articles to help us provide context for today's witness. It is April 12, 2018 news report entitled Former Prosecutor Judge Selected to Lead Rail Investigation, and a September 20, 2019 news report entitled Email Show Turmoil in State Auditor's Office During Rail Audit. For members who are here via Zoom, Representative Tarnas will be emailing this to you shortly, so you will have this in your email shortly. I should start. Present in the room, I have Representative Kyle Yamashita, Representative Linda Ichiyama, who is serving as Vice Chair, Representative Amy Perruso, and Representative Della Kobayashi. And again, on Zoom is Representative David Tarnas. So thank you, members, for joining in on this important work. Members, we also have documents provided by Mr. Lee under subpoena. We are making sure that it's bait stamped appropriately, and this will also be in your email. This will take us a little bit more time to process, but we will be able to, again, as I said, request Mr. Lee to come forward if it's needed. All right. So members, I want to start in with some opening comments. I know and I want to acknowledge that members have expressed some concern that this committee was going beyond its boundaries and its scope. But what I would like to say, and as I said from the very beginning, the follow-up on the audits pursuant to our resolution included following up on the audits in any other matters. And I've also said from the very beginning that this committee will go where the evidence leads us. By its nature, an investigation is not a predetermined process. An investigation is a fact-finding process by which the investigative committee adduces testimony and evidence from credible sources and follows the evidence where it leads. Evidence was provided to us by a credible witness, an interested person, an interested party pursuant to our rules. And as it's the obligation of this legislative committee, indeed, as it's a fundamental obligation of the legislature to investigate and conduct oversight to ensure that government operations are managed properly. The decision was made that we would entertain the testimony of Mr. Randall Lee because of its significance and its importance on the management and function of government, and indeed, the management and function of the Office of the Auditor. On another note, it is important to me that this investigative committee that is tasked by our members to follow up on the audits, follow the evidence, because it's our duty to not sit on information or sweep it under the rug. Again, I am mindful of the concerns. And so as we proceed, there is the commitment of myself as chair and of this committee to stay focused on ensuring the proper management and oversight of now all 3 agencies, the Department of Land and Natural Resources, the Agribusiness Development Corporation, and the Office of the Auditor. On that note, members, again, because this committee and this House of Representatives will not be part of sweeping information under the rug when it is presented to us by credible sources, we are going to go down this path. But I will retain authorization to ensure that we follow up on all aspects of the audits so identified. So on that note, members, for our first testifier for today, Mr. Randall Lee, Esquire, here is present with us. Mr. Lee, if you could stand and I will give you the oath or affirmation. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you, Judge Lee. And let the record reflect that Judge Lee answered in the affirmative. So members, I will be conducting this examination at first, but then questions will be opened up because I do want to get just the basic information out there. Judge Lee, thank you for joining us today. For the edification of the committee as well as the public who is watching, can you provide a little bit of biographical detail about your professional background?
Representative Belatti, Vice Chair Ichiyama, and representatives of the Investigative Committee. My name is Randall Lee. I have been a public servant for approximately 39 years. I currently am teaching criminal justice at Hawaii Pacific University, but my career extended where I was a public defender for 1 year. I was a prosecutor for 25 years, and I was a circuit court judge on the bench for 10 years. My career as a prosecutor was culminated to the extent that I did public corruption, white collar investigations, as well as cases. I've taught at the Trial Advocacy Center in South Carolina, teaching prosecutors across the United States how to prosecute cases. I've also taught with the National White Collar Crime Center in terms of how to investigate and prosecute fraud and corruption. So I am here today pursuant to the subpoena, and I will obey the subpoena, just to let you know. And I will answer any questions you may have, but that's my background.
Thank you, Judge Lee. Can you explain to us how you came to be a contractor with the Office of the Auditor in and about 2018?
Well, what happened was at the time I was, I had a MOU or a contract with the State Harbors Division to train their law enforcement officers in terms of criminal law and criminal procedure. My MOU was in conjunction with the Department of the Attorney General. So I was housed within the investigative section of the Attorney General's office, which is the basement next to the building next to the Hawaii Supreme Court. I received a telephone call from the secretary of the investigative section, and she had indicated that Mr. Kondo wanted to set up a meeting with me. I was rather puzzled because when the auditor calls you, you're wondering, am I being investigated? So I agreed to the meeting, and we did have a meeting in the basement of the investigative section. Mr. Kondo was present. Mr. Dan Hanagami was present. I believe an assistant with Mr. Kondo was present also, Megan Johnson. At that time, Mr. Kondo had indicated that, first informed us that the legislature had requested an audit of the rail, but that there was a December deadline, I believe, December 2000, I don't recall the date. I want to say either 2020, I could be wrong, but there was a quick turnaround on this audit. And Mr. Kondo had indicated that because Mr. Hanagami and myself had done the Eva Villages investigation and had uncovered fraud, even though there was an audit by the city on the Eva Villages project, he wanted to use our expertise to find out what happened, if anything, with regards to the rail. That was presented to Mr. Hanagami and myself. I was interested, don't get me wrong, primarily because it was a challenge. And the other thing was, as just a public citizen, I wanted to know what the heck was happening. But I also had some concerns, and I expressed those concerns to Mr. Kondo. And I actually asked him, you sure you really want us to do this? And the reason I had these concerns was because I informed Mr. Kondo that, and no disrespect to any of the representatives, that a lot of politicians don't like us because we did the Jeremy Harris campaign spending investigation, and there were a lot of people who still hold some gripes about us doing it. Mr. Kondo indicated that he had no concerns about that, and that he wanted us to help him in the audit. So that's how I got involved in it. Then we had some discussions in terms of the mechanism. Would it be a MOU? Would it be an independent contract? But I left it to Mr. Kondo and his agency to figure out what the best course would be. At that point, I dealt with Mr. Ron Shiige at the auditor's office.
So just to tie that up, so you ultimately ended up signing a contract for professional services, is that correct? And then you provided that to us.
Yeah, he had to go through the procurement process where I would have to submit my resume, tax clearance, etc. I was selected, and he sent a contract on April 3rd. And I submitted the contract to the committee for their review. I had to sign the contract, notarize it, and return it. And once it became final, Mr. Kondo said he wanted us to hit the road running and unturn whatever we find. He wanted us to start immediately. So once we had the contract, we had several meetings, I believe, and we then started.
Okay, before we get into your actual field work, can you just explain your understanding of what the scope of the investigation was from you?
The scope of the investigation, according to Mr. Kondo, as to what he wanted us to do was he wanted us to hit the road running. He wanted us to uncover and turn over every stone to find out what happened. We also indicated that what if we uncover criminal matters, in which case Mr. Kondo said our duty was to bring it to him, and he would decide what to do with if there are any criminal findings.
And then in the process of being hired, were you ever provided a manual of guides or explained what the Yellow Book standards were for the Office of the Auditor?
I don't even know what the Yellow Book is.
Okay.
So the answer is no.
Okay, thank you. Let's jump into your field work though. So with the directive of wanting to hit hit the road running and uncover every stone, what did you do as part of your investigation?
Well, the first thing we did was there was a meet and greet. When I say a meet and greet, we went to the Hart office at Ali'i Place, and we met with the administration of Hart. It was kind of a meet and greet so that they knew who we were, we knew who they were, and kind of get a common understanding as to we're going to be there. So when you see us, don't be alarmed. So initially it was a meet and greet. After that, we had I don't want to call it an excursion, but we had a tour of the rail project. In other words, we went we went down and we went from Kapolei all the way to Ala Moana, and there was a description as to the route of the rail, etc. So they wanted us to show us the scope of the project. So the first thing we did was had the meet and greet, and then we had a tour of the entire line of the project. I recall during the course of the tour, I asked Mr. Yu, when we got to Ala Moana, I said, what if you don't have the property to end where you are?
Let me interrupt. So Mr. Yu is Mr. Robert Yu with Hart at the time.
Right. I think I forget what position he was. And I merely questioned, I said, what if you don't have the property? What happens? He said, then we've got to reroute the route. So I thought that was kind of strange, but it is what it is. That was the first two things. The second thing, what we then did was we started looking at going to the Hart office and looking at the contracts as well as some of the expenditures. Initially, what had happened was I took phase one, which was Kapolei to Pearl Highlands, and Mr. Hanagami took from Pearl Highlands, which is phase 2, to the stadium. However, because of the magnitude of change orders that were in phase 1, Mr. Hanagami didn't do phase 2, and he jumped in and helped me with phase 1. So we started focusing on phase 1 because phase 1 had the most amount of change orders. There were approximately 160 change orders. So one of the first things we did was we looked at all of the contracts of all the bidders. We also looked at the request for proposals, RFPs from the city. And then we looked at the contract between the city and Kiewit, who was given the contract, to determine what was Kiewit's responsibility. So the first thing we did was we looked at what was the scope of phase 1. The second thing what we did was we looked at the bids, who were the companies who bid it. And then the third thing what we did was we looked at the actual contract that was issued to Kiewit and try and determine what was the scope of their work, to determine whether or not the change orders fit within the framework of what they had to do and who paid for what, okay? Because we knew there were, the change orders resulted in a number of overages, in other words, additional expenditures. So we knew there were more money going out than the original contract. And part of the concerns that Mr. Hanagami and I had was this a bid rigging? In other words, did we have a bid rigging situation whereby someone got a lower bid knowing that the eventual actual contract payout would be higher so that you could favor someone who is the lower bid, and to the disadvantage of the other bidders. So my concern was there a fairness within the bidding process? The other concern that I had was why was there a bid when things were not, the project wasn't ready, to put it distinctly. So the initial concern was there bid rigging? The other thing was, why did the bid, why was there a request for bids when the project wasn't ready? And within the bid process, they had public meetings with the contractors, I believe. And the contractors could come in and ask whatever questions they would have. For example, if the contractor asked the question about how high things were, they would answer. If something went wrong, what would happen? So the whole process was with the RFPs and the meeting from what I gather, was that the contractors would have an idea in order to make an informed bid. Okay, so it's kind of like building a house. You're not going to know how much it's going to cost you unless you have the plans. So the question, so what we did was we were looking at those kind of notes. So that's where we were comparing stuff.
Okay, so at this point, it was simply document reviews and you haven't interviewed anyone in this part of the fieldwork process. Is that correct?
I think we interviewed one person, this elderly gentleman. He was with the city because before HART became HART, the project actually started with the city Department of Transportation. Then Department of Transportation then handed off the project to HART, which was later a quasi-city organization that was created by, I guess, the voters, right? Mm-hmm. So the first thing what we did, we wanted to talk to the director, the director at the time of the Department of Transportation. And I remember his first name was Taro, but I can't remember his last name. We tried to find out a little bit about the process. He was retired at the time, so that's the first person we interviewed. After that, we pretty much hit the documents.
Okay, was this interview conducted by, was this interview recorded, and were you provided any guidance from the Office of the Auditor about how to conduct the interviews?
It was recorded by, I believe, Mr. Hanagami, not myself. In terms of guidance, again, we weren't told what to ask. We were given free rein in terms of what to ask. I mean, the standing order was, I want you guys to hit the road running, and I want you to turn over whatever stones you might find so that we can get to the bottom of this. So it was pretty much, we could ask whatever we wanted to ask.
So with these concerns that you had with this preliminary interview and the document reviews, did you memorialize these concerns in any way?
Yeah, what happened was when I started looking at the requirements of the Kiewit contract, like who paid for what. And then I looked at the change orders. I began to question, why are we paying, well, why is the city paying for some stuff that perhaps it should have been Kiewit's responsibility. One of my biggest concerns was the precast yard. The precast yard is the facility that builds those cement things that we see. They bring in sections. And under the contract builder, which is Kiewit, was responsible for all the facilities. But then the city was paying for the rent as well as taxes on it. So that was one of those things that I was kind of questioned. And I included, pursuant to the subpoena, some of my emails. And if you look at the emails, it's in chronological order. It kind of confirms the concerns that I had. Another concern was there was a delay on the project. And during the period of the delay, there were 17 change orders. So the question is, and the delay was because of the litigation. So the question then became, why are we doing change orders if the project is stopped? So those were the concerns that I had. I did memorialize it. And what I did was I highlighted the contract terms. I also highlighted the requirements of Kiewit. And then I also made reference to the change orders that were questionable. Now, again, without talking to anyone, just looking at the documents, the public documents that HART paid money for, I couldn't, just looking at the documents, said that this was something inappropriate or not. I just couldn't, but it raised these questions in my mind.
So one of the things that we learned through this hearing process is that the Office of the Auditor has a process where the audit team meets and discusses these concerns. Were there those kinds of team meetings amongst you and any members of the auditor, or in fact with the auditor?
Yeah, we had meetings. I don't recall how frequent we had the meetings, but we did have meetings. I'd like to say at least once every 2 or 3 weeks. It would be in the conference room in the auditor's office, I believe on the 4th floor. Mr. Kondo would be there. At one meeting, I believe there was the private company that was hired, BKD. There was a representative who was present. I know we got into a little disagreement with some of the stuff that was being raised, but yeah, we did have meetings where we would discuss things like what we found and what any concerns.
Okay, so there was, and I just want to make it clear for the record that these team meetings, these audit meetings, it would have been yourself at times.
Mr. Hanagami, at one point there was a representative from BKD. I can't remember his name. There was another staff member, or maybe 2 staff members from Mr. Kondo's office too.
Okay,
present.
So these concerns were raised and talked about, is that correct?
Yeah, we talked about like what the progress was, concerns that we might have, things like that.
And was there a point in time at which you were, it was suggested that maybe you stop your investigation or pause or in any way stop following up on the concerns you raised?
Yeah, well, what happened was, I believe shortly after I submitted my questionable documents, questionable transactions, Mr. Kondo had advised us to stop looking at documents because he wanted BKD to catch up with us. You got to remember, us meaning Mr. Hanagami and myself, but BKD came down with a team of people. So we questioned, why don't we just keep going and they can catch up with us? But he said, no, why don't you just don't look at documents and let the BKD catch up with you guys. During the course of the process, I know I asked Mr. Kondo at least one time whether or not we can start looking at the documents again. He told me to just hang on. They're still, I guess, catching up with us. So we didn't look at any other documents after that. In other words, so that's the first thing. The other thing is I questioned, I said, well, if we can't look at documents, what should we do? Because without looking at the documents, how I'm going to question witnesses? Because if I don't know what happened on the documents, how am I going to question witnesses? So he said, well, just find out what the procedures were. So I said, okay. So the first witness we spoke to was Ms. Ichiyama from the city purchasing. Again, the reason why we went to see her was because before HART became HART, it was Department of Transportation. So we wanted to know what was the procurement process. You know, how did this all start? So we started with her. And I believe Mr. Kondo had one of his auditor staff come with us, the gentleman in the wheelchair, Sean. So he actually came to the interview with us with Ms. Ichiyama.
And then in the course of that interview, were any further concerns raised? Well,
the concern was, well, I don't know if it was a concern. It wasn't a concern of us, but Ms. Ichiyama said that the Corporation Counsel advised her to tape the interview because we were taping it. And the reason why we were taping it was so that nobody could accuse us of misrepresenting what was being said. So we were taping it, and that was pursuant to Mr. Kondo's request. and we would do it anyway. So she pulled out her tape recorder and started taping, and which was fine. There was nothing to hide, but it was kind of interesting because I actually questioned her about the precast yard stuff, and she had indicated, well, the contract could be interpreted different ways. So I left it at that. But it raised some concern as to who gave the marching orders to start the project when the archaeological survey wasn't done. The EIS was in its final phase. And I documented it in my email. The very first $15 million delay was due to the fact that the city didn't have the license and right of way to do the geotechnical drilling. So in other words, that was a condition because the city was supposed to do geotechnical drilling. And with those drilling, those core samples, Kiewit would then examine it and either accept it or do their own. And if Kiewit accepted what the city provided, and then they run into a problem, they cannot complain for a change order. That's the way the contract was written. So the question in my mind was, okay, so how can someone bid on something when there was no geotechnical drilling? Because you're going into a project not knowing what you're drilling. Rock, sand, water. So how could someone make a bid? Okay, so the real question in my mind was, why are we doing RFPs when the city didn't have the project ready to give a bid? Okay, so that was my concern.
Okay, after this first interview, did you have any further interviews?
What happened was I know there was a push and shove between Hart and Mr. Kondo with regards to the taping. Mr. Kondo felt that it was inappropriate, and Hart thought it was appropriate that they tape, and there was a push and shove going on. I know that there was a dispute, but at that point, what we were then trying to do is find out from the project managers who signed the change orders, what was the process? So remember now, what we were told to do was to interview witnesses in terms of procedure. So we wanted to find out why these project managers were signing off on change orders, and was anybody checking it? Now, if you look at the change order, it went through the project manager, it went through the director or the CEO, whoever it is, at Hart, and then it was also confirmed by Corporation Counsel. So it went through 3 layers. So in my mind, I was wondering why somebody wasn't questioning it, because just eyeballing it, I raised questions, right? In just a short period of time. And, I raised these questions, but yet nobody else was raising these questions. So I said, well, okay, well, we'll find out procedure, because that was our marching orders. So I was then starting to schedule appointments with project managers, but I was getting frustrated because they would set up appointments with us, and then they would cancel the morning of the meeting. Now, all of these project managers who signed off on those change orders now were not working for the city, but were working for engineering companies who are getting contracts with Hart. So it raised the red flag in my mind. Why are these guys hiding? Okay, why are they afraid to tell us what the procedure? And I explained to them, all I wanted to know what the procedure was. So I reached out to about 3 or 4. I would set, and it was a common pattern. They would set up appointments, and would cancel about an hour before the appointment. Okay, we expressed our frustration to Mr. Kondo, and I think Mr. Hanagami even suggested that perhaps he issue subpoenas on them. But we were told at that point to stop interviewing witnesses. There was one witness that we did do, which was Mr. Frank Doyle, because that was already scheduled. Frank Doyle was a city, a long-time, old-time city project manager who Mr. Toro brought over from wastewater management of all places to the heart, a rail, which raised another question. He didn't have the kind of experience. Now, my understanding was the rail project was a unique project, never happened before, obviously because we don't have a rail, and that there was a consultant that was hired by the city to give them advice. So the real question is, why was the consultant giving the type of advice? What kind of advice was being given? So, but we were told to stop interviewing witnesses. I told Mr. Kondo that I already scheduled an interview with Mr. Doyle, and he said, okay, you can just go do that. But he indicated that before I schedule any other witnesses, I had to, one, tell them who the witnesses were, what their position and their relevancy, and what questions I'm going to ask. And I kind of told him, well, you know, it's kind of free-flowing because I really don't know what they're going to tell me, you know. But you got to also understand, at that point, we didn't look at any other documents. So we were kind of in the blind ourselves because I could be asking someone something and he or she could be lying to me, which would be verified by a document and I wouldn't know. Time was of the essence because Mr. Kondo had to get this audit presented to the legislature. So we followed his orders in terms of doing what he told us to do.
So you conducted this interview with Mr. Doyle, and who was in attendance of this interview with you?
Well, Mr. Hanagami and myself, and really to our surprise, Mr. Kondo and Ms. Iinuma, who was the project, the audit manager, came to the interview, which was fine. So we interviewed Mr. Doyle at Halava Wastewater Management, the city facility. And I distinctly remember it because I think Mr. Kondo got lost. So, you know, I saw him, you know, so we had to wait for him.
Anything of significance or concerns raised in that interview from your perspective as the field worker?
Well, you know, at the end of the interview, I remember, I didn't tell this to Mr. Kondo, but I indicated to Mr. Hanagami as we were walking back to our cars, I said, I felt like I was in a trial where the witness was getting rehabilitated. And I said, I actually told Mr. Hanagami, I said, hey, whose side is he on, right? And so but I left it at that. I mean,
so Mr. Lee, if you could,
that was just my opinion.
Sure, I don't know that everyone understands what a trial situation is and what rehabilitation of a witness means, but can you explain that a little bit for
Yeah, so for example, a witness would say something and then the attorney would then say, well, did you really mean this? To rehabilitate them, okay? You know, things like that. I distinctly remembered, you know, that kind of tenor. But again, that was my impression sitting in that interview.
Any more significant field work that you want to speak about before we move on to how your relationship with the Office of the Auditor? No,
we stopped after Mr. Doyle. If you look at my January 20th email that I wrote to Ms. Iinuma. She wanted to know if we had any other reports or records and things like that. And I told her no, that after our interview with Frank Doyle, Mr. Doyle, we were told to stop. On my own, I was trying to get the Hawaii Burial Council's letter to the State Archaeological Department with the Hawaiian homelands. The reason why was apparently the city was given a letter early on to stop the project because the archaeological survey had to be the entire project, not just a segment. So I indicated to Ms. Iinuma that on my own, I tried to get that. But once we were told to stop, I pretty much just stopped. I stopped at even scheduling witnesses or anything. I didn't do anything after that.
Okay, can you explain to the committee how your relationship with the Office of the Auditor came to an end? Well,
so we stopped, and approximately maybe 2 or 3 weeks, we were dormant. In other words, we didn't do anything. We didn't look at documents. We didn't interview any witnesses. And I remember communicating to Mr. Kondo, hey, we've been dormant for such a long time. I need to know what's the plan with me, because I told him that I rearranged my teaching and training schedule around your the audit. But if we're not doing the audit, I need to get my life back in order and rearrange it so that I can do the training and my teaching. In which case, he then said, he apologized. He said that he was busy and that he was meaning to set up a meeting, in which case he did set up a meeting with us. And we met in Mr. Kondo's office on the 5th floor.
So the members can have a sense of about what month and year was it?
It was in July of, and if I can just look at my, was around July 10th of 2018.
Okay, so your contract had been executed in April. It actually sounds like you've done a tremendous amount of work preliminarily, and then by July 2018, you're having this meeting with Mr. Kondo.
Actually, by June, we stopped. Okay, so it was before July. So we stopped really like the middle of June because we were told to stop. And at which point we stopped and didn't do anything. And then I remember communicating to Mr. Kondo. I said, hey, I need to get my life back in order. And he wrote an email on July 10th indicating that he's sorry that he's not being more communicative, and he intended to email me to see if we can set up a meeting on Thursday or Friday of that week. And we did meet with him.
And then what was explained to you?
Mr. Hanagami and myself, and I believe Ms. Iinuma was present in the room. We exchanged pleasantries first, and then again, Mr. Kondo apologized for not being as communicative as possible, and he indicated that one of the problems that he encountered was the fact that Representative Saiki wouldn't approve a release of funding to pay us. So at that point, I remember remarking to Mr. Kondo, I told him, Les, you know something, didn't I tell you that the legislature is going to be kind of pissed off about us? And he just chuckled, but he said that that Representative Saiki wouldn't release the funding to pay for our work, and that in order to get funding, he needed to get not only Representative Saiki's approval, but Senator Kochi's approval, at which point, and he couldn't promise anything. So I said, well, okay, if that's the case, then, you know, why don't we just break our ties? So and that's what happened.
In breaking your ties, did you, what amount of monies did you get paid?
I got paid something like $33,000.
And the entire contract was for?
$200,000.
Okay. Did you ever verify further that the problem with conducting your portion of the audit was a funding issue with anybody other than Mr. Kondo?
I had no reason. I mean, I trusted less. I had no reason to question him. And I wasn't going to go, I don't even know Representative Psyche, so I wasn't going to go to Representative Psyche and grovel. So I said, well, if that's the case, then let's go our own ways. Mr. Hanagami agreed to, and he said, well, he was going to then help the feds do their investigation on the rail, which is fine. And we parted ways. Mr. Kondo indicated that perhaps I should keep my computer, hang on to my computer. It was a auditor issued computer in case he does get funding. And I just told him, no, let's make a clean break. So I went downstairs, got the computer, and I brought it back up then a few minutes later.
Was there ever any further communications about the termination of your contract with Mr. Kondo?
Not with Mr. Kondo, but with the auditors, the manager, Ms. Ichiyama. I'm not sure if it was CC to Mr. Kondo, but on my own, I pretty much told her several things that I indicated that they should look at the STG contract because I took a peek before I left, and I noticed that the contract was double the price of phase 1 and phase 2. So phase 1 was approximately 450 million. Phase 2 was about the same, 450 million. But phase 3 under STG was close to $1 billion. It was 980 somewhat million dollars. I also indicated that I noticed that there were no change orders, at least when I peeked. So I said, it looks like somebody might have padded the contract so that nobody would complain about change orders. But then I also indicated at the meeting with Mr. Kondo and Ms. Ichiyama, I indicated jokingly, I said, well, probably because they don't want us to look at the rail because the gubernatorial race was coming up and we might have found something that would embarrass somebody. So I said, I left it as that.
I think I just have one last question, then I do want to open it up to members. And we'll start with Rep. Tarnas and go through our normal list, as if this is the SLDF audit. Was there any concern, and did you request any explanation from the Office of the Auditor that the termination of your contract, which is, you know, it's a short timeline between April and July 2018. Was there any request to ensure an explanation that it wasn't due to your fault?
I remember telling Mr. Kondo that what I really wanted in the, I said, I want to make sure that the termination of my contract or the cancellation of my contract was not due to any breach by me, or that I wasn't doing the work. And I told him that my concern was people would see that I was on a contract from April and then it's terminated in June. Like, hey, there must be something wrong. I did something wrong. So I was kind of concerned that it might reflect poorly on me. So I requested that it be in the letter. He didn't put it in the letter, but he said that he didn't recall me saying that. But I indicated, and then he said, well, who would question in his letter, he said, who would question or his email, who had questioned the cancellation, right? But he said, if anybody questions it, it wasn't because it was unilateral and that it wasn't because of any breach or wrongdoing.
Okay. One last question. I apologize, members, because this will close the loop on kind of the whole audit process for rail, and then I'll open it up to questions for Rep. Tarnas to go first. The Office of the Auditor did ultimately issue, I believe, 4 reports on the rail audit. Do you, from your examination of those reports, if you reviewed it, did you see any mention of the work that you folks did in terms of actually raising any kind of concerns? And I wanted you to constrain your thoughts to the audit report provided by the Office of the Auditor, not the city audit.
Based on, I took a perusal of I didn't examine it in great detail, but based on what I saw of the audit, I don't know if it really fully addressed the questionable transaction, like was it justified? Because I have no idea to this day if it was justified or not. The other thing would be who was the cause of this debacle, because the rail project was contracted prior to it being the project being ready. So who gave the marching orders to start? Okay, I think everybody jumps on Ms. Kalakini's lawsuit about the archaeological, but they forget one thing. I think it was a convenient excuse for the delay. For example, how did they determine every delay was $15 million on the nose? Not even $15 million, $1. It's $15 million on the nose. How did we get to that settlement amount, right? So I don't, it's just my opinion. Mm-hmm. And my opinion is that I don't, it pretty much just, we've had audits in the past about the rail, and it pretty much highlighted what we already knew, I think.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lee. I'm going to turn this over now to questions, and first up will be Representative Tarnas. Representative Tarnas.
Thank you very much, Chair Belatti, and thank you very much, Judge Lee, for being with us today. I want to focus my questions on what you had mentioned, that you had determined that there may potentially be questionable transactions, and you highlighted a couple of different examples of those. What was could you describe to us how you presented that proof of that led you to those concerns, what evidence you had that led you to those concerns, and then you presented those to the auditor, and what was his process to determine whether or not you should continue to pursue investigation of those to determine if they were in fact questionable, and what was his final determination? So I'm interested in the process as well as the results.
Okay, so what I did was I looked at the requirement of the contract and what Kiewit was supposed to do. So if Kiewit was supposed to do A, B, and C, and Kiewit was responsible for the cost of A, B, and C, the question then became is why is the city paying for expenditures for A or B or C? So what I saw was transactions that I didn't think that the city under the contract should have paid. So that's why I call it questionable. And then the reason I say it's questionable is because without talking to the project managers who approved those, I couldn't say for a fact it was any wrongdoing or there was a justification. But I just flagged it as a red flag. For example, I'm trying to think of a good example. One of the things was hypothetically, the Kiewit was supposed to go and examine the surface and subsurface. Surface meaning what's above the ground, and subsurface what's below the ground. Okay, so why are we paying change orders for something that was obvious above ground? You know, so those were the kinds of things I would raise. And what I did was that each questionable transaction, I highlighted the portion of the contract of Kiewit's contract that said, for example, Kiewit was responsible for this. And then I linked it with the change order, the number of the change order number, so that you could see if Kiewit was supposed to pay for this, why are we paying? And that, but again, it was just questionable. That's why I didn't want to say it was something inappropriate, or because I wasn't able to talk to any of the project managers.
Okay, so you had your concerns that these may potentially be questionable transactions. You put together your evidence, and then as you were directed, you presented them to the auditor. What was his process to review that, and what was his determination about whether you should pursue that investigation further?
I submitted the questionable documents in a memorandum to Mr. Kondo and all of the members on the audit team. And that's all I did.
Did the auditor make a determination on whether you should continue to investigate those potentially questionable transactions?
Well, if he did, it wasn't communicated to us because we were told not to look at any other documents.
Okay, so at that point you were told not to look at any more documents and not to do any more interviews unless he approved them.
Right. So we didn't go any further than that.
Okay, thanks. That's enough for my first go around. Back to you, Chair Belatti.
Thank you. Minority Leader Okimoto.
Just a quick question, tagging on to what Rep. Tarnas asked. You mentioned that you were told to not look at any further documents. Could you give me chronologically what timeline you had started and where you got in the document?
I'm sorry, the math is kind of screwing things up.
Sorry. Just thank you. Just tagging on to what Rep. Tarnas had asked, you mentioned that you had been told at a certain time to stop digging any further. Could you give me a chronological timeline of what you had been able to dive into document-wise?
Just document-wise, I was only able to identify the contract, the terms of the contract, and compare that with the change orders. I couldn't go any further. I didn't go any further, or couldn't go any further at that point.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
Representative Kobayashi.
Thank you, Chair. So, Your Honor, the chair has described the genesis of this direction as being concerns raised by a concerned citizen. Are you the concerned citizen?
I don't know. I don't know who the concerned citizen is.
Oh, did you approach us to become a witness, or did we approach you?
You guys approached me.
Okay, thank you. I have no other questions.
Thank you. Representative Yamashita.
Thank you, Chair. Judge, and I just want to understand a little bit more about the when you're looking into the change orders. Did you look into if the RFP in the first place was incomplete, which led to the change orders?
Wait, I don't quite understand your question.
Was the RFP for whatever contract they went into, right?
Okay. I know what you're asking.
Was the work incomplete?
Was the RFP incomplete?
Yes.
The RFP is what the RFP is. The RFP is basically the terms of the contract.
I understand that, but right, could it have been more detailed as to avoid change orders?
I don't know if it could have been more detailed. For example,
Okay, so you didn't.
I mean, for example, Representative Yamashita, if you were the contractor and your job was to look at the surface and subsurface, and I don't know what district you're from, but anybody who drove down Farrington Highway, you'll know that there's telephone poles and telephone lines, right? So the question then becomes is, why are we paying to modify the equipment to go under the telephone lines or electric lines? That's what I'm saying. It was specific as to that. So the question then becomes is, why are we paying for modification of equipment to go under the telephone lines when you know there's telephone lines? You should have bid for that, right? That's a condition that you should have known, right? Why are we paying for geotechnical drilling when that was your responsibility? Remember, unless you contested, the RFP was clear. Unless you contested the city's geotechnical, any problem that you had was your problem. Okay. So yes and no. In hindsight, maybe they could have made things more clear, but there was some stuff that were kind of clear in my mind. So when I raised those questionable transactions, it was because when I read the RFP, it was in my mind clear. And why are we paying for stuff? You know, why is there a change order for stuff like that?
Okay, so when you were looking into the change orders, you said that the pecking order is the project manager, then the head of HART, right? And then the corporation council reviews it. Did you check each of those steps or?
Yeah, in fact, let's see, I don't know if I had it. Oh, yeah, each of those steps were signed off. There were paperwork signed off. So we were even going to try and question corporation counsel, like why, I mean, corporation counsel was supposed to look at the contract and make sure that, right? Just like how we're supposed to be doing.
But you did not have the opportunity to do that.
No, we tried to start with the project managers, the initial guys who generated the change order. Okay. But they were, I don't want to say stonewalling, but they were making all kinds of excuses, canceling, schedule, cancel, and it was not one, almost 3 or 4 of them, all same pattern. They would set up an appointment and then the morning of it, they would cancel. In fact, one project manager was even transferred to the mainland. How's that?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Rep Hashem, I can refer you, Rep Perruso. No questions? Rep Ichiyama.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Judge Lee, for being here this morning. I was wondering if you could tell us when you were going through the review, I think you said of phase 1, where you were comparing the contracts, and I think you said it was roughly 100 change orders?
164 to be exact, I think.
And then can you give us some, like, just an order of magnitude? Out of the 164, how many of them would you deem as questionable or not as within the scope of the contract?
You're testing my memory.
Just rough, I mean, would you say like most, few?
76.
76 out of
Yeah.
164.
Yeah, and you gotta also understand, Representative Ichiyama, the 76 were the ones that were, in my opinion, were clear.
So you would say that-
Anything close, I gave it to them. In other words, if it could have gone either way, I gave it to them. So the 76 were the ones that I thought were clear. Just looking at the RFP, the special provisions of the contract, and looking at the change order.
So you would say that's a conservative number.
I would say it's a conservative number because anything close again, I would give it to them.
Okay.
In other words, the change order was okay.
So 76 out of 164, that's roughly half.
Yeah.
If I'm thinking of that correctly. So when you brought this back to Auditor Kondo and the team, and you showed them that roughly half of the change orders in your mind raised some serious questions, what was their reaction?
I gave him the memo and that's all. I didn't get any kind of response. I mean, if you're asking me if I got a response, I didn't get a response other than the fact that I submitted the memo. And part of doing the memo was I wanted to show Mr. Kondo that I was memorializing, I was doing some of the work, right? So I gave him the memo and what he did with it, I have no idea.
Okay. And then
but we weren't redirected. In other words, we weren't redirected, okay, follow up on this or do this, or we were just, it was just a memo that I submitted to him, gave him an idea of what I found.
And then just to confirm, when you had reviewed the auditor's final product, the audit of HART, the state office of the auditor's audit of HART, was this issue of the questionable change orders brought up in any of the audits reports?
I think it was generalized. I believe it said something to the effect that there was no supporting documents or something like that. But having supporting documents is different from whether or not we should pay it. Huh? You know what I'm saying? You could have justified payment without supporting documents, but the question then became were these payments legitimate? In other words, was it something that the city should have paid? That's pretty much it.
So based on your work and the memo that you prepared and researched and the final outcome in the report, in your opinion, was there additional follow-up work done to answer some of the questions that you were raising?
Well, that's, you know, the bottom line is this. Do we really know who created this mess? To this day, who gave the marching orders to start? We know there was the delay. We know there's this overrun of costs, okay? We know that the project, they didn't do the preconditions and et cetera. But why did it happen? Was it political? Was it financial? I don't know. To this day, I have no idea. We know there was a problem, okay? We all know that. We know there was a delay. We know there's overrun, and we know there's overcost. But who's taking responsibility for this? Really? The real question that you guys should look at is, you guys paid money to these guys. Who is being held accountable for that? You know, the unfortunate thing is with government, people just figure it's just money. Why are people getting so upset about it? Why am I getting upset about it? It's because I see stuff like this, okay? And for me, if I see something wrong, I'm gonna call it out, okay? Okay, now, I don't know if it's wrong because I wasn't able to go further, but Why isn't people holding the people who started this accountable? You know, we hired, the city hired a consultant. Why are we not holding the consultant responsible for this? They were told by, that's why I was trying to get that letter from the state archaeological. The city was told you needed to do an archaeological, right? So why did they parcel it? Why did they parcel phase one? Because if you look at the law, and the Supreme Court threw it back at them, the law is you have to do an archaeological project for the entire project. And if you look at the description of the project, okay, in their contract, the description of the project is, sorry, so I can quote it correctly. The project is a Honolulu high capacity transit corridor project. The project involves the design and construction of approximately 20 miles of fixed guideway rail system running from East Kapolei to Ala Moana Center. Right? So who was the, okay, we have our lawyers, who was the light bulb that told us that we could do this in parcel?
I think what you're saying, Judge Lee, is that even though you have asked those questions.
Well, to answer your question, I don't know if you got your money's worth. I mean, we can do audits till you're blue in the face, but do we know, as you read the audit, do you know what caused this? Do you really know? Do you really know who's responsible for this?
So
I don't know.
I'll take the next question. And I'll make a little comment on this. I think
getting a little, you know, it's upsetting because you do work and you bring things up to people's attention and it doesn't matter.
Judge Lee, I want to communicate to you on behalf of this committee and the House of Representatives. It does matter, and that's why we are having you here to discuss where the flaws may have been in the execution of this audit. Let me tell you that the members of this committee, members who have sat in the legislature to determine how to fund rail in the past, have relied upon and trusted that the Office of the Auditor would conduct that audit that would provide the accountability we needed. So if you look to Senate Bill 4 of 2017, first regular session, would it surprise you to know that, I'm trying to find the exact wording, that the monies that were encumbered for your contract actually could have gone through 2019, a year after your contract had been actually terminated by the Office of the Auditor?
You know something, I don't know what Mr. Kondo did after we submitted our things. We don't know what the auditor's office did with what we found. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I had no reason to doubt Mr. Kondo, what he told us. And I wasn't, I mean, I tell you, my concern was to do a professional job, okay? I had no idea, until you told me that, I have no idea. When Mr. Kondo said that there was no funding that was released, I trusted him. I wasn't going to question him. You know, I had no reason to doubt him. And again, I wasn't going to go to Representative Psyche to find out, hey, how come you didn't approve the money? I mean, you know, at that point, that was fine.
Okay. No, that's fair.
I just moved on.
And I appreciate the professionalism with which you've approached this, because it certainly seems like in the 2 to 3 months that you were on the job that you were raising significant concerns. And let me just correct the record. And Senate Bill number 4 says that the money would not lapse until June 30th, 2019.
Yeah, I don't even
You
know.
know that.
I really don't know anything about that. My concern was just because Mr. Kondo said that there was a quick, the timeline was rather quick. We had to work as quickly as possible. So my concern was, okay, let's move it along. In fact, if you look at my billing, I didn't even do 40 hours a week. And I didn't even bill for stuff that I put in. I didn't think it was right. Like for example, inputting stuff. I wasn't going to charge them for inputting stuff, you know.
My one last question, it's a follow-up to Vice Chair's insightful question. What was the dollar amount of the 76 out of 164 change
I
orders?
gotta add it up. I'm sorry. I had it at one point, but remember that this is almost 3 years ago. So it's kind of like a bad memory. So I kind of put it on the side until you guys contacted me, and I'm like, okay, then I start looking at stuff.
Okay, well, we'll certainly take a look at that because I think that none of those amounts are insignificant to this body because we know the value of every dollar of the taxpayers' money. I think we know that when it
don't
comes
take
to
my comments negatively. I mean, sorry. When I did Ever Villages and the city was ripped off $5.8 million, unfortunately, that was some of the attitude of the city employees that I dealt with. Okay, and for me, I take it serious. I had a job to do, and I was going to do the best job I could do. Okay, the contract was canceled, and it was canceled. I wasn't going to cry over spilled milk, and I wasn't going to sue to get a breach of contract because I'm not going to ask for money for work I never did. That's not right. So for me, it was like my professional reputation was on this.
members. I think we've gone for about an hour.
Well, I think there's a question back there.
I'm going to go through one more round of questions.
I must have said something that kind of piqued your curiosity.
We'll go to Rep. Perruso, and then we'll start at the top, and then I think that'll be the end of it unless members have other burning questions, but I think we can do our last round. So we'll start with Rep. Perruso and then go back to Rep. Tarnas. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for being here. I did want to ask if there were any provisions in your contract that prohibited you from raising these concerns publicly as a citizen, kind of sharing some of your findings for the purposes of furthering public discussion.
No, I mean, there's the confidentiality, but the confidentiality required dealt with releasing of personal information, and all of my information was from the public contracts and the public payments, all the invoices. Anybody who looked at the public contracts and the invoices would have raised the same. Well, we would like to think they would raise the same questionable transactions, but you know, all of the documents, all the information I got was from public documents, which is the contracts that the city paid.
Okay, so, and forgive me if I don't know the answer to this, but then my understanding is that you did not then engage in any kind of public discussion about your concerns.
No, I didn't. You know, I didn't, and part of the reason why was because I couldn't verify my findings.
Right.
So what am I going to do? Go out and say there was something illegal when I couldn't verify it? That would be kind of reckless.
Yeah, I
So
appreciate that.
that's why I called it a questionable transactions, because I didn't know if it was, I couldn't verify anything.
Okay.
So I couldn't go out and say, well, you know, they're ripping off the public, because would be reckless. I didn't know.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Perruso. Rep. Tarnas.
Thanks very much. I appreciate, and I just wanted to clarify. So you brought up these potentially questionable transactions. At that point, you were told no longer to look at documents or do interviews. But then fast forward to the audit itself, it said, you described it as saying, yes, there were potentially some questionable transactions, but there was a lack of documentation, and the audit left it at that. It seems that the next step after you brought up what you brought up would have been to look at the documents and do more investigation into that. Is it your opinion that that just wasn't done according to what was in the audit?
Wait, I beg your pardon? I didn't get.
So the question is, to follow up on your concerns, what one would have done was to look at the documents and do more digging. You weren't able to do that. Do you think that the auditor did that on his own, or the rest of the auditing team did that based on what was in the audit?
I don't know what they did. I don't even know if they spoke to the former employees, which are the project managers who left. These were the people that I was trying to interview to find out, why did you guys approve certain things? I don't even know if they talked to Corporation Counsel, why they signed off on stuff. So I have no idea what they did. So all I did is, did that. Just to let you know, on July 20th, I wrote an email, and CC to Mr. Kondo. I said, hi, Val, one last thing. I took a peek at phase 3 STG's contract and saw that the risk Kiewit took was now shifted on the city, and that STG's contract was doubled of Kiewit's phase 1 and 2 contract. I also saw that there were no change orders except perhaps 2 administrative corrections. Now, you remember now, this was on my own, this was after my contract was terminated, okay? And I said, it looks like whoever was in charge knew that change orders would look bad. So it appears that the change orders were padded into STG's contract, which might explain why there are no change orders. I also said that it's also interesting that a political campaign notes fiscal responsibility on the rail project. At least on paper, it seems that way since there's no change orders. And then I said, finally, just recently, road builders got a $25 million contract to pave Cam Highway. My recollection that under the general conditions of the RFP, Kiewit was required to grade, pave, and repair the roadway and any adjacent roadway impacted by the rail project. But you need to review the RFP again. If that's the case, why is Hart giving $25 million contract? And I apologize for my email being so long. But even that, I brought up stuff like, hey, why are we giving a $25 million contract to pave the road when Kiewit's contract was to pave the road?
Understood.
Basically, well, dig up the road, you pave the road.
I appreciate that you brought up all of these concerns.
And that was after my contract was terminated. So
I understand. You brought up a number of concerns when you were under contract, and then you volunteered some additional concerns even after your contract was over. But it's just, and I also hear from you that you have no idea whether those were ever followed up on. So
I have no idea what was done.
Okay.
I wasn't no longer privy to the audit team.
Understood.
So again, we parted ways. So
Understood.
I went on my own way, and I don't know what they did.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to make sure I understood that. Okay. Thank you very much. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair Tarnas. Just to follow up on that, I think that line of inquiry is important, but we may have an opportunity to do a limited inquiry into what the further audit team did with the BKD contractor. So, but again, being mindful that we do have a timeline, one of the things that this committee may do will be to do one more line of asking and questioning of the BKD contractor, in particular to follow up on quoted statements from a BKD representative that essentially said in the September 2019 article presented to all members, quote, "We were really trying to be independent and objective and report the facts as we saw them. It became clear during the process that that was not what Mr. Kondo was looking for." So for the purpose of limited inquiry, we may be following up on that, Chair Tarnas, to pursue that question.
Thank you.
Minority Leader Okimoto.
Thank you, Chair.
Before you ask your question, I just wanted to also bring up this other email that I wrote on July 20th. Again, after my contract, I said, "Hi Val, I don't have any other documents or papers. Our last interview was with Frank Doyle, and we were told to stop reviewing documents and interviewing witnesses shortly thereafter. I tried to get a letter from the State Archaeological Department, which notified the city that the archaeological survey needed to be completed for the entire project. But when we got to the order to stop, everything ceased. I did look at the first $15 million change order on my own time, just to see the reasoning for the delay. The delay was because the city didn't secure permits, right of entry to the geotechnical boring, and that was required to have been completed before posting the request for proposals. So in essence, the project was not ready to solicit bids or enter into the contract when the city did contract with Kiewit. That being the case, city purchasing was misled to go forward with the bidding process, and it would be interesting to see what the city told the feds to get federal funding. But without being able to review any documents or interviewing witnesses, I can only make a guess that misrepresentations were made in order to go forward with the project." So that was brought to their attention too, okay?
Thank you, Judge Lee. Minority Leader.
Thank you. Judge Lee, if I can go back to the change orders. You mentioned it several times, and you mentioned that there were 164 for this project up until the time that you had done your audit. For my reference, what is an amount that's typical for a project of this size?
I don't know, but remember now, Representative Okimoto, this was a design build. It wasn't a design and then a build. In other words, they were designing and building it as it was going along. And the whole purpose of the design build was that you would design and build as you go along so that you would minimize change orders.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So the real question then becomes is, well, I don't know, if you're building a house and you had 164 change orders, it's either your contractor's bad or your design is bad. I mean, because they're designing it as they build.
Mm-hmm. Noted, thank you.
But if you look at some of the change orders, one of the change orders was the rail stop at Hokulani, the residential Hokulea, the residential development out by the Kroc Center.
Oh, okay.
Right? There were 3 change orders for the where the rail stop was. In other words, the stop where people can go on the rail. There were 3 change orders, which means if you started this way, they pretty much went around back again. So the question then becomes is why you need 3 change orders for the entrance.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
So I cannot ask your question as to why, I cannot answer your question as to how many change orders are reasonable. In a big project, I'm pretty sure there are change orders. I'm not saying there isn't. That's why I gave them some of the change orders. The questionable documents that I raised wasn't because why we had change orders, but was because are these things that we should have paid? In other words, should you have paid for this? You know, and it wasn't like you shouldn't have any change orders. It was, are these the kind of change orders that we should be paying for?
Okay, thank you. I had a separate question based on something that you mentioned earlier. If I understand correctly, you mentioned that there were city project managers that eventually left to start working for engineering firms,
yes.
Receiving contracts from HART. That's
yes.
what I heard. Okay. Did anyone else see this as a concern or something worth pursuing further when this was brought
Well,
to
I don't
attention.
know, well, I don't know if they ever interviewed these people. Because these are the people who are signing off on those change orders. So I don't know what the process was. I don't know what the justification was because we were never able to interview them. So I don't know if Mr. Kondo and his audit team was able to interview them.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Judge Lee.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Representative Kobayashi.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Judge Lee.
Yeah.
So would you say you have ill will towards Les Kondo?
Oh, no. I had no reason to believe that Mr. Kondo lied to me. And to this day, I still have that, I don't know what happened, to be honest with you. I'm here because the committee subpoenaed me and I'm going to comply with the subpoena and answer you guys' questions. I have no ill will towards Mr. Kondo or anybody on the audit team that was.
Thank you. Based on working with them, would you consider Les Kondo to be crooked and corrupt?
No. No.
Do you believe he tries to do a good job?
Huh?
Do you believe he's trying to do a good job? His intent is to do a good job.
Well, I'd like to think all public officials are trying to do their best job. I don't think all public officials are corrupt. Heaven forbid if I had that kind of feeling, we're in a really bad situation if we think that everybody's corrupt. I don't think so. I mean, I don't think Mr. Kondo's corrupt. I don't know what happened. I took him at his word that they didn't have money. And so again, I didn't question it. I had no reason to question him, even to this day, until Ms. Belatti or Representative Belatti told me about, I had no idea,
Thanks so much.
you know.
Representative Yamashita.
Thank you, Chair. Just for clarity, so when you're asked to terminate the contract or whatever the conversation was, the message was that the money was not going to come from the legislature?
He said that, to put it correctly, he said that the Representative Saiki denied the request to use surplus funds. And as a result, he said that he refused to request to use surplus funds to pay for the work we must complete by the end of the year. And then he said the entire amount was encumbered by my contract and BKD's contract. I don't know about that, but then he said that Representative Saiki insisted that we obtain his and Senate President, I'm assuming that's President Kochi's approval. So that's what I was told. And at that point, again, like I told Representative Kobayashi, I had no reason to question. I mean, at least we had some resolution. We knew, okay, so I can now focus on my teaching and my other stuff. Yeah, I mean, I'm saying at that point, I was kind of like in a holding pattern. And I mean, I couldn't commit to anything. So, so when he told us that, we parted ways. Again, he told me to hang on to my computer and I thought, hey, let's make a clean break, man. I went downstairs, I brought the computer right up. Took me about 10 minutes to catch the elevator and come down. Okay. Thank goodness the elevator was working because at one point the elevator wasn't working. We had to walk up. So.
Okay, so, but when you went into contract, your understanding or your your conversations were that the money would be there to pay your contract?
We never, all he told me was, all Mr. Kondo told me was that my contract was for 100 hours, or I forget how much hours, but the total contract was 200,000. And that was it.
Okay, so the process normally is that the legislature appropriates, and then the agency or department or whatever goes in for a request of allotment, and then it's encumbered. I guess you would never ask a question like that, but did you feel like the money was there for your contract?
You know, Representative Yamashita, again, part of me was, this was a challenge, okay? I wanted to, the dollar amount was set by Mr. Kondo, okay? You know, pretty much he set the terms of the contract. I never asked, like, for example, oh, wait a minute, 200 is too low, I should go up higher. I never did any of that. There was really no negotiation. He said that. I had no reason to believe that he would not, and I didn't think that he would enter into a contract if he didn't have the money. But then again, you know, no offense to the government, but we sometimes spend money that we don't have. Yeah? But I'm being facetious, Representative Hashem. You know, now that I'm off the bench, I can say whatever I want to say. I mean, but I never thought, I mean, it never crossed my mind, that kind of situation. In fact, when he told me he didn't have the money, it never crossed my mind to challenge him either. I trusted less. I never thought that, no bad thoughts crossed my mind. Let's put it that way. Okay. And it kind of answers Representative Kobayashi. I never had any bad thoughts about Mr. Kondo. Even today, I mean, you know, I have nothing against Mr. Kondo or his office.
Okay, so, and the only reason I ask is because by statute, the department has to have the allotment before they go into contract.
I don't know. All I know is he entered in the contract, so I'm assuming, I can only assume he had the funds, but I never, if you want me to say, I never said, hey Les, do you have the money before I signed this contract? No, I never did that. I never questioned, and I had no reason to question Mr. Kondo.
All right, thank you.
You know, even today, I have no reason to question it because I have no idea what happened behind the scenes, okay?
Representative Hashem.
No, I'm
Okay, but last opportunity, and we can bring back Mr. Lee if we need to. We do have his documents as well, and then the testimony is under oath, so we can revisit these questions in our review. Rep. Perruso.
Thank you, Judge Lee. So just for my own curiosity, what criteria did you use to draw the clear, bright line around the 76 that you said were like raised alarms for you?
Okay, so what I did was I looked at the contract with Hewitt.
Yeah.
The general provisions and the special provisions, okay? And I then put it in a box like this is what Hewitt pays for, and this is what the city pays for, okay? So the city gave Hewitt a particular contract to do the work. And then I look at the change order and I compare the change order with the special provisions and the general provisions. And then I ask myself, is this something that could be or not? It's just a gut feeling. But it has to be clear. It has to be clear that like there's not a violation, but that's something that maybe we shouldn't pay. I gave the example about the telephone lines. Okay. There was, for example, they experienced hazardous waste on Navy property. So why are we paying for it? Why not the Navy can pay for the cleanup?
Yeah. I
Right?
mean, the reason
That kind of stuff.
Yeah, so the reason I asked that question is I remember a lot of the conversation around one of the entrance stations. And so there was a lot of community pushback against, I think it being the access being at street level and concerns about danger. And so you mentioned the 3 change orders around that particular station.
Yeah, but it raised a red flag.
Right.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. So I was just wondering, like, to what extent were a lot of these change orders politically motivated? So they were kind of imposed by council members who made sure that those change orders happened.
You know, I'm a suspicious person, okay? And I was just thinking, the way I thought about it was this. Were they rearranging the rail entrance so that they could get more houses in there? So sorry.
That's a different question.
I've been in the practice at the prosecutors so long, and I've seen so much that you wouldn't believe that I kind of have a suspicious mind. Let's put it that way. So when I look at these things, it raises suspicion in my mind. Right? Right?
Thank you.
Thank you. Rep Ichiyama for the last question. All right. Thank you, Judge Lee.
Okay.
Members, we will get these documents to you promptly. And then we do have hearings in the afternoon with Mr. Ed Young. If there's no further questions, we'll adjourn at this time. And we'll see everyone back here at 1 o'clock. We are adjourned.
Nice meeting all of you.